Hi there, Vincent on the Netto here at Haven Humane. And I'm going to read The Never-Ending Story by Mikael Enda to these little kittens here. Yeah. They seem to be taking interest in my backpack, these two. Anyway. Yeah. 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 Prologue. I don't know if, yeah. I don't know if you can see this, but it says Carl Conrad Coriander Old Books. This inscription could be seen on the glass door of a small shop. But naturally, this was the only way it looked if you were inside the dimly lit shop, looking out at the street through the plate glass door. Outside, it was a gray, cold, rainy November morning. Careful, careful, little one. Sit there. It's alright. Yeah, yeah. You can't. They're fighting. Yeah. The rain ran down the glass and over the ornate leathers. Through the glass, there was nothing to be seen but the rain-splotched walls. Splotched wall across the street. It was scratching my shoe. Suddenly, the door was opened so violently that a little cluster of brass bells twinkled wildly. But taking quite some time to calm down. The cause of this hubbub was a fat little boy of 10 or 12. His wet, dark brown hair hung down over his face. His coat was soaked and dripping. Cat is soaked and dripping. And he was carrying a school satchel slung over his shoulder. He was rather pale and out of breath, but despite the hurry he had been in the moment before, I don't want to get you into the bag. He was rather pale and out of breath, but despite the hurry he had been in the moment before, he was standing in the open doorway as though rooted from the spot. Before him lay a long, narrow room, the back of which was lost in the half light. The walls were lined with shelves. With books of all shapes and sizes. Large folios were piled high onto the floor. And on several tables lay heaps of small leather-bound books whose spines were glittered with gold. The far end of the room was blocked off by a shoulder-high wall of books, behind which the light of a lamp could be seen. From time to time, a ring of smoke rose up in the lamplight, expanded, and vanished in darkness. One was reminded of the smoke signals that Native Americans used to use for sending news from hilltop to hilltop. Apparently someone was sitting there, and sure enough, the little boy heard a cross voice from behind the wall of books. "You're wandering inside or outside. Shut the door, there's a draft." The boy obeyed and quietly shut the door. Then he approached the wall of books and looked cautiously around the corner. There, in a high, worn leather wing chair, sat a short, stout man in a rumpled black suit. That looked frayed and somehow dusty. His paunch was held in by a vest with a flower design. He was bald except for outcroppings of white hair over his ears. His red face suggested a vicious bulldog. Behave yourselves. A gold-rimmed pince nez was perched on his bulbous nose. He was smoking a curved pipe which dangled from one corner of his mouth and pulled his... Hey, stop it. Come on. It's all right. Which dangled from one corner of his mouth and pulled his whole cheek out of shape. On his lap he held a book which he had evidently been reading, for in closing it he had left the thick forefinger of his left hand between these as a kind of bookmark. With his right hand he now removed his spectacles and examined the fat little boy who stood there dripping. After a while the man narrowed his eyes, which made him look more vicious than ever. He muttered, "Goodness gracious." Then he opened his book and went on reading. The little boy didn't know quite what to do, so he just stood there gaping. Careful. Finally, the man closed his book, as before, with his finger between the pages and growled, "Listen, my boy, I can't abide children. I know the style on it is to make a terrible fuss over you, but I don't go for it. I simply have no use for children. As far as I'm concerned, they're no good for anything but screaming, torturing people, breaking things, smearing books with jam, and tearing the pages. It never dawned on them that grown-ups may also have their troubles and cares. I'm only telling you this so you'll know where you're at. Anyway, I have no children's books, and I wouldn't sell you the other kind. So now we understand each other, I hope." After saying all this without taking his pipe out of his mouth, he opened his book and went on reading. The boy nodded silently and turned to go, but somehow he felt that he couldn't take his last remark lying down. He turned around and said softly, "All children aren't like that." Slowly the man looked up again and removed his spectacles. "You still here? What must one do to be rid of you? And what was that terribly important thing you had to tell me?" "It wasn't terribly important," said the boy still more softly. "Just wanted to say that all children aren't the way you said." "Really?" The man raised his eyebrows in affected surprise. "Then you must be the big exception, I presume." The fat boy didn't know what to say. He only shrugged his shoulders a little and turned to go. "And anyway," he heard the gruff voice behind him, "where are your manners? If you hadn't any, you'd have introduced yourself." "My name is Bastian," said the boy. "Bastian Balthazar Books." "That's a rather odd name," the old man grumbled. "All those B's. Oh well, you can't help it. You didn't choose it. My name is Carl Conrad Coriander." That makes 3 C's. The Grand grumbled. Quite right. Puffed a few clouds. Oh well. Our names don't really matter, as we'll never see each other again. But before you leave, there's just one thing I'd like to know. What made you come bursting into my shop like that? Looked to me as if you were running away from something. Am I right? Bastion nodded. Suddenly his round face was a little paler than before and his eyes got a little larger. I suppose it made off with someone's cash box, Mr. Coriander conjectured. Or knocked an old woman down or whatever little scams like you do nowadays. Are the police after you, boy? Bastion shook his head. Speak up, said Mr. Coriander. Whom were you running away from? The others. What others? The children in my class. Why? They won't leave me alone. What did they do to you? They wait for me outside the schoolhouse. And then what? Then they shout all sorts of things, then push me around and laugh at me. You just put up with that? Mr. Coriander looked at the boy for a while disapprovingly. Then he asked, why don't you give them a good punch in the nose? Bastion gave. No, I wouldn't do that. And besides, I can't box. I wouldn't want to do that. Besides, I can't box. And how about wrestling? Mr. Coriander asked, or running or swimming, football, gymnastics. Are you no good at that? Boy shook his head. In other words, said Mr. Coriander, you're a weakling. Bastion shrugged his shoulders. But you can still talk, said Mr. Coriander. Why don't you talk back at them when they make fun of you? I tried. Well, they threw me into a garbage can and tied the lid on. Well, for 2 hours before somebody hurt me. Said Mr. Coriander, grumbled. And now you don't dare? Bastion nodded. In that case, Mr. Coriander concluded, you're a scaredy cat too. Bastion hung his head. And probably a hopeless grind, best in the class, teacher's pet, is that it? No, said Bastion, looking down. Was put back last year. Good Lord, said Mr. Coriander. A failure all along the line. Bastion said nothing. He just stood there in his dripping coat. His arms hung limp at his sides. What kind of things do they yell at and when they make fun of you, Mr. Coriander? Wanted to know. Oh, all kinds. For instance, Namby-Pamby sits on a crock and pot cuts up, says Namby-Pamby. I guess it's because I weigh a lot. Not very clever, said Mr. Coriander. What else? Bastion hesitated before listening. Screwball, nitwit, braggart, liar. Screwball? Why did they call you that? I talk to myself sometimes. What kind of things do you say? I think up stories. Invent names and words that don't exist. That kind of thing. Do you say these things to yourself? Why? Well, nobody else would be interested. Mr. Coriander fell into a thoughtful silence. What do your parents say about this? Bastion didn't answer right away. After a while, he mumbled, Father doesn't say anything. He never says anything. It's all the same to him. And your mother? She's gone. Parents are divorced? No, said Bastion. She's dead. At that moment, the telephone rang. With some difficulty, Mr. Coriander pulled himself out of his armchair and shuffled into a small room behind the shop. He picked up the receiver and instinctively, Bastion heard him saying his name. After that, there was nothing to be heard but a low mumbling. Bastion stood there. He didn't quite know why he said all that he had said, and admitted so much. He hated being questioned like that. He broke into a sweat as it occurred to him that he was already late for school. He'd have to hurry. Oh yes, he'd have to run. But he just stood there, unable to move. Something held him fast. He didn't know what. He could still hear the muffled voice from the back room. But it was a long telephone conversation. Came to Bastion that he had been staring the whole time at the book that Mr. Coriander had been holding, and that was now lying on the armchair. He couldn't take his eyes off of it. It seemed to have a kind of magnetic power that attracted him irresistibly. He went over to the chair, slowly held out his hand, and touched the book. In that moment, something inside him went click, as though a trap had been shut. Bastion had a vague feeling that touching the book had started something irrevocable, which would now take its course. He picked up the book and examined it from all sides. It was bound in copper-colored silk and shimmered when he moved it about. Leafing through the pages, he saw the book was printed in 2 colors. There seemed to be no pictures, but there were large, beautiful capital letters at the beginning of the chapters. Examining the binding more closely, he discovered 2 snakes on it, one light, one dark. No. They were binding each other's tails, so forming an oval. Inside the novel, in strangely intricate letters, he saw the title, The Neverending Story. Human passions have mysterious ways, in children as well as grown-ups. Those affected by them can't explain them. Those who haven't known them have no understanding of them at all. Some people risk their lives to conquer a mountain peak. No one, not even themselves, can really explain why. Others ruin themselves for trying to win the heart of a certain person who wants nothing to do with them. Still others are destroyed by their devotion to the pleasures of the table. Some are so bent on winning a game of chance that they lose everything they own and sometimes sacrifice everything for a dream that can never come true. Some think their only hope of happiness lies in being somewhere else and spend their whole lives traveling from place to place. And some people have no rest until they have become powerful. In short, there are as many different passions as there are people. Bastion Balthazar Book's passion was books. If you have never spent whole afternoons with burning ears and rumpled hair, forgetting the world around you over a book, forgetting cold and hunger. If you have never read secretly under the bedclothes with a flashlight because your mother or father or some other well-meaning person has switched off the lamp on the plausible ground that it was time to sleep because you had to get up so early. If you have never wept bitter tears because a wonderful story has come to an end, you must take your leave of the characters with whom you have shared so many adventures, whom you have loved and admired, for whom you have hoped and feared, and without whose company life seems empty and meaningless. If such things have not been part of your own experience, you probably won't understand what Bastion did next. Staring at the title of the book, he turned hot and cold, cold and hot. Here was just what he had dreamed of, what he had longed for ever since the passion for books had taken hold of him. A story that never ended. The book of books. He had to have this book at any price. At any price? That was easily said. Even if he had more to offer than the bit of pocket money he had on him, this cranky Mr. Coriander had given him clearly to understand that he would never sell him a single book. He certainly wouldn't give it away. The situation was hopeless. Yet Bastion knew he couldn't leave without the book. It was clear to him that he had come to the shop because of this book. It had called to him in some mysterious way because it wanted to be his, because it had somehow always belonged to him. Bastion listened to the mumbling from the little back room. In a twinkling, before he knew it, he had the book under his coat and was hugging it with both arms. Without a sound, he backed up to the street door, keeping an anxious eye on the other door, the one leading to the back room. Cautiously, he turned the door handle. The brass bells were ringing. He opened the glass just wide enough for him to slip through. He quietly closed the door behind him. Only then did he start running. The books, copybooks, pens, pencils, and his satchel jiggled and rattled to the rhythm of his steps. He had a stitch in his side, but he kept on running. This conscience, which hadn't let out a peep in the bookshop, had suddenly woken up. All the arguments that had seemed to so convincingly melted away like snowmen under the breath of a fiery breath of a dragon. He had stolen. He was a thief. What he had done was worse than common theft. That book was certainly the only one of its kind and impossible to replace. Sure, Mr. Coriander's greatest treasure, seeing a violin's precious violin or king's crown, wasn't at all the same as filching money from a cash drawer. As he ran, he hugged the book so tight under his coat. Regardless of what this book might cost him, he couldn't bear to lose it. It was all he had left in the world. Because naturally, he couldn't go home anymore. He tried to imagine his father at work in the big room he furnished as a laboratory. Around him lay dozens of plaster casts of human teeth, for his father was a dental technician. Bastion had never stopped to ask himself whether his father enjoyed his work. It occurred to him now for the first time, but now he would never be able to ask him. If he went home now, his father would come out of his lab in a white smock, possibly holding a plaster cast, and he would ask him, "Home so soon?" "Yes," Bastion would answer. "No school today?" He saw his father's quiet, sad face, and knew he couldn't possibly lie to him. Much less could he tell him the truth. No, the only thing left for him was to go away somewhere, far, far away. His father must never find out his son was a thief. And maybe he wouldn't even notice that Bastion wasn't there anymore. Bastion found this thought almost comforting. He had stopped running. Walking slowly, he saw the schoolhouse at the end of the street. Without thinking, he was taking his usual route to school. He passed a few people here and there, yet the street seemed deserted. But to a schoolboy appearing very, very late, the world around the schoolhouse always seemed to have gone dead. At every step, he felt the fear rising within him. Under the best circumstances, he was afraid of school. In place of his daily defeats, afraid of his teachers who gently appealed to his conscience or made him the butt of their rages, afraid of the other children who made fun of him and never missed a chance to show him how clumsy and defenseless he was. He had always thought of his school years as a prison term with no end in sight, a misery that would continue until he grew up, something he would just have to live through. When he now passed through the echoing corridors with their smells of Florax and wet overcoats, when the lurking stillness suddenly stopped his ears like cotton, when at last he reached the door of his classroom, which was painted the same old spinach colored as the walls around it, he realized that this too was no place for him. He'd have to go away, so he might as well go at once. But where to? Sebastian had read stories about boys who ran away to sea and sailed out into the world to make their fortune. Some became pirates or heroes. Others grew rich, and when they returned home years later, no one could guess who they were. But Bastian didn't feel up to that kind of thing. He couldn't conceive anyone taking him as a cabin boy. Besides, he had no idea how to reach a seaport with suitable ships for such undertaking. So where could he go? Suddenly he thought of the right place. The only place where, at least for the time being, no one would ever find him or even look for him. The attic of the school was large and dark, smelled of dust and mothballs. Not a sound to be heard except for the muffled drumming of the rain on the enormous tin roof. Great beams blackened with age rose at regular intervals from the plank floor, joined with the other beams at head height, and lost themselves in the darkness. Here and there spider-webs as big as hammocks swayed gently in the air currents. A milky light fell from a skylight in the roof. The only living thing in this place where time seemed to stand still was a little mouse. Hobbling across the floor, leaving tiny footprints in the dust. Between them a fine line, a tail print. Suddenly it stopped and pricked up its ears. Then it vanished. Whoosh! Into a hole in the floor. The mouse had heard the sound of a key in a big lock. The attic door opened slowly with a loud squeak. For a moment, a long strip of light crossed the room. Bastian slipped in. Then again, with a squeak, the door closed. Bastian put the big key in the lock from inside and turned it. Then he pushed the bolt and heaved a sigh of relief. Now no one could possibly find him. No one would look for him in here. The place was seldom used. He was pretty sure of that. Even if someone had something to do in the attic today or tomorrow, he would simply find the door locked. The key would be gone. Even if they somehow got the door open, Bastian would have time to hide behind the junk that was stored here. Little by little, his eyes got used to the dim light. He knew the place. Some months before, he had helped the janitor to carry a laundry basket full of old copybooks up here. Then he had seen where the key to the attic door was kept. A wall cupboard next to the topmost flight of stairs. He hadn't thought of it since, but today he remembered. Bastian began to shiver. His coat was soaked through and it was cold in the attic. First thing to do was find a place where he could make himself more or less comfortable, because he took it for granted that he'd have to stay here for a long time. How long? The question didn't enter his head, nor did it occur to him that he would soon be hungry and thirsty. He looked around for a while. The place was crammed with junk of all kinds. There were shelves full of old files and records, benches, and ink-stained desks were heaped up every which way. A dozen old maps were hanging on an iron frame. There were blackboards that had lost a good deal of their black, and cast iron stoves and broken down pieces of gymnasium equipment, including a horse with the stuffing coming out through the cracks in its hide, and a number of soiled mats. There were also quite a few stuffed animals, at least what the moss had made of them. A big owl, a golden eagle, a fox, and so on. Cracked retorts and other chemical equipment. A galvanometer, a human skeleton hanging on a clothes rack, and a large number of cartons full of old books and papers. Bastian decided to make his home on the pile of old gym mats. When he stretched out on them, it was like lying on a sofa. He dragged them to the place under the skylight where the light was best. Not far away, he found a pile of gray army blankets. They were dusty and ragged, but that didn't matter now. He carried them over to his nest. He took off his wet coat and hung it on the clothes rack beside the skeleton. Skeleton jiggled and swayed, but Bastion had no fear of it. Maybe because he was used to such things at home. He also remembered moved his wet shoes. In his stocking feet, he squat down on the mat and wrapped himself in the gray blankets like a Native American. Beside him lay his school satchel and the copper-colored book. It passed through his mind that the rest of them down in the class would be having history just then. Maybe they read a composition of some deadly dull subject. Bastion looked at the book. I wonder, he said to himself, what's in a book while it's closed? Oh, I'm sure it's full of letters printed on paper, but all the same, something must be happening, because as soon as I open it, there's a whole story of people I don't know yet, and all kinds of adventures and deeds and battles. Sometimes there are storms at sea, or it takes you to strange cities and countries. All those things are somehow show up in a book. Of course, you have to read it to find out. But it's already there. That's the funny thing. I just wish I knew how it could be. Suddenly, an almost festive move came over him. He settled himself, picked up the book, opened it to the first page, and began to read A Never-Ending Story.